A very good evening to one and all present. On behalf of Study Circle, I invite you to the 84th meeting. The topic for today's discussion is evolution of POCSO and its effect on justice delivery system. Our resource persons for the day are Mr. Rana Mukherjee, Senior Advocate, Supreme Court of India, and Mr. Sanjay Pinto, Advocate in the Madras High Court, legal columnist, author, and former resident editor of NDTV. I now invite Mr. Siva Shanmugam, Advocate, to give the welcome address and a brief introduction of the speakers.
Good evening to one and all. I welcome the speakers of the day. To start with, Mr. Rana Mukherjee, Senior Advocate. He grew up in a small mining town in Odisha, schooling in Rourkela, and graduated in commerce in St. Xavier's College, Calcutta. And he also completed his law course in Calcutta University. He started his practice in the original side of Calcutta High Court. Later, he shifted to Delhi in 1989. And basically, he's practicing in Supreme Court, Delhi High Court, CLB, and MRTP. He was a partner of a firm till he went independent in the year 1991. He was designated as a senior advocate by the Supreme Court in 2015. His major practices are in the field of company law, insolvency law, constitution, property, arbitration. And he is also in the death penalty panel of senior advocates of the Supreme Court, and a senior advocate and a government lawyer for the state of UP as well. He is a regular resource person to our study circle, and this should be his third session with our study circle. I welcome you, sir. Again, Mr. Sanjay Pinto is no alien to us. This should be his second session, and this session is coordinating with the senior counsel. Before donning the black gown as an advocate, Mr. Sanjay Pinto, as on date, he specializes in media, criminal, constitution, corporate, and arbitration and consumer cases. Sanjay Pinto is a journalist, and he was a resident editor of NDTV 24/7 and executive editor of NDTV Hindu and former national debating champion. Sanjay wears many hats. He is an arbitrator, legal columnist of Deccan Chronicle, wherein he has published more than 260 articles till now, and I hope it still continues. Then panelist of a national TV debates and host of Sanjay Pinto Show on YouTube, author of 3 books which are widely renowned and well read. He represented India in IVLP program and the rule of law and judicial reforms in USA in the year 2014, and he is a guest lecturer of law schools in India. His interest towards society is well known and well read in his columns. With this short introduction, I welcome you both, sir, and the floor is open to you. Thank you, sir.
Yes, the topic today is a very burning topic in the sense that we will be talking of how children have been used and abused over the last for centuries. I must also tell you all that, you see, rape and pillage was a kind of control exercised by kingdoms over other kingdoms where they used to conquer. So the first thing was you rape and you make sure that the next generation would be someone from your seed. And this went on. And if you look at ancient religious texts, right from the Bible, the Quran, and Gita, each one talks of rape and adultery. Adultery used to be the major concern for different societies and generations. And so punishments are provided for both, specifically in the Quran and the Bible, where they said stone them to death. The Quran went a step ahead and also had other kinds of punishments like 100 lashes, because that used to be the had crime, they used to call it had. It's actually it's also used in Hindi now. Had is when you cross all barriers. And also dismembering of certain limbs of your body part. Those are the punishments. But if you look at the historical nature of these crimes, it is a well-known fact that old kings and emperors used to indulge in sex with children, girls, also with young boys. In fact, it is rumored that the Babri Masjid was a result of one such incident with Emperor Babur with an urchin. He was actually a fruit seller or something, and he fell in love with that boy. But these are all speculative discussion, but it is there in the social circle when people talk of these incidents. Now, one easy way out for most of these emperors, or the way they used to administer justice in those days, was that if a girl child was sexually molested and raped, the first thing was, can you marry her? And this is manifested even till today. If you remember, in a very sordid observation by a now retired Chief Justice of the country, that was about 3-4 months back, when he had made the startling statement of granting bail to a person, saying that though you have raped, are you willing to marry her? And that the social media, the press, everyone went hammer and tongs to the judge when he had to issue a clarification to the Registrar General of the Supreme Court to say, no, I did not mean what I said. This is only to show the patriarchal mindset that persists even till today. So having said that, you see, when we are confronted with sexual assault against girl child, it can also transcend to boys, because the new act is a gender neutral act. So what we have done is we have divided this segment into two. The first is I'll take you all, traverse you all to the history of this so-called development of law till 2012, after which this Prevention of Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act 2012 was enacted. And from then on, Mr. Sanjay Pinto will take you all to the contours of that act. Now, if you look at the historical judicial development in the subcontinent, we had the Sultanate period. I'm not going beyond that. I'm not talking medieval period and other periods. We had the Sultanate period, which started from 11th century to the 14th, 15th century. They had their own barbaric way of administering law. Then came the Mughal period. The Mughal period also had their own way of, giving Sharia law as a mode of dispensing with justice. And the Sharia law was, like I said, you had these incidents where you had stoning, you had dismembering, you had beheading, and also lashes. At the same time, the Hindu little kingdoms used to follow the Manusmriti. The Manusmriti also said that a major punishment for such infraction would be imposed. But that major punishment would depend on the king of the day. So every little kingdom has its own way of dealing with such so-called crimes. Then for the first time, we had an European invasion in India in 1498 in Calicut. Vasco da Gama landed, and he somehow took control, and he was also very, very barbaric kind of invader. And he took control of parts of Kerala, which spread later on to Goa, Daman, and even parts of Bombay. And they had their own Portuguese way of dealing with subjects, as they used to do there, but the natives were treated always different. Then in 1600 and 1601, by a charter, the East India Company came to it. The charter gave them limited rights to administer within their own zone their sense of justice. 1664, the charter was renewed by King Charles. The first codified act actually was the Regulating Act of 1774. Warren Hastings implored upon the British Parliament to give them total power. Please understand, East India Company was a corporation, it was a company limited by shares. And yet it was given powers to administer justice. And so we also had a Supreme Court in Calcutta. If you go back in record, 1665 was the first jury trial held in Madras. So we have the Southern Nizami Adalat, we had these little pockets of power where justice used to be dealt with, especially criminal justice. And it was very clear that the Europeans and the Britishers would be, if they were found guilty of certain offenses, they would have to be tried only in the courts of their respective countries. Now the Dutch came, the French came, the Danes came to India. Each one had the little powers and their little control, and within their zone, they used to administer their way of giving justice. Now, 1774 Regulating Act was later on replaced by the Pitt's Act in 1813. In 1833, Thomas Macaulay again presented a bill in the House of Commons and said that the subcontinent needed a proper codified law to control his his contention was that the natives needed to be controlled. There should be a proper codified criminal law. Till 13th, he had a three-member body. He was heading that body, the first law commission for Indian subcontinent. And till 1338, they prepared a report, and that was tabled. Nothing happened to that report. It was kept pending. 1857 was actually the watershed year for the subcontinent, where the mutiny happened, and the British, with the brute force, took total control, exiled the then Bahadur, the Emperor of India. Bahadur Shah Zafar, he was exiled to Burma. And they, for once in 1857, set their proper foothold under the Queen to take control of India. By which time the East India Company was slowly going out of reckoning. They were only involved in trade of tea and silk and other saltpeter. Now, suddenly this act, the draft act, which was lying in the Parliament, British Parliament, was brought to the fore, and 1860 was the first codified act for British India. And what was that act? The Indian Penal Code. Now, mind you, this is the oldest surviving act, even today. We have had the minimum number of amendments to this act. There are only a total of 72 amendments, and the reason is at least 4 or 5 amendments are within the 375, 376 because of the age of the so-called child. I'll tell you why it happened. So 1860 was this Indian Penal Code, and Indian Penal Code had 3 or 4 provisions leading to such sexual offences. So if you look at section 90 first, section 354, section 366, then you come to section 375, 376, 377. 377, as you know, dealt with homosexual and homosexual behavior. The first Indian Criminal Procedure Code was enacted in 1861, which followed the IPC. That was amended for the first time in 1898, and the criminal code that we now have is 1973. So that criminal code was brought in force because of the famous Nanavati Court case judgment. If you will recall, the jury system was finally abolished. The 3 presidency towns, Calcutta, Madras, and Bombay, had this provision of having a jury trial. The Nanavati case in 1961, where the admiral, Navy commander, had killed his wife's paramour, was supposed to be sentenced to death. He was acquitted later on. That they found that the jury system had actually failed. So that brought about this wholesale amendment in the Criminal Procedure Code in 1973, which is still in vogue. So now going back to the 1860 Act, the section 375 first. Section 375, as it was enacted then, was of a very limited operation of definition of rape. And they had defined it as such: a man is said to commit rape who, except in the case hereinafter accepted, has sexual intercourse, mind you, with a woman. There's nothing to do with child here. A child was also treated to be a woman, then I'll tell you why. Under circumstances falling under any of the 5 following descriptions: A, first is against her will; B is without her consent; third, with her consent when her consent has been obtained by putting her in fear of death or of her. Third, this can be related to section 90 of the IPC. Fourthly, with a consent when the man knows that he is not a husband and that a consent is given because she believes that he is another man to whom she is or believes her to be lawfully married. The reason for this subsection, this explanation, is of Pardanashin women. Earlier, we used to have Pardanashin women. Half the time, they could never even see their husband's face in public. So this was one of those categories which actually did the Pardanashin. And fifthly was with or without her consent when she is under 16 years of age. This was amended then. It was actually 10 years of age. Now, if you look at, and there were the exceptions, that penetration is sufficient to constitute the sexual intercourse necessary for the offense of rape. Exception is sexual intercourse by a man with his own wife. The wife not being under 15 years of age is not rape. And this was finally struck down in 2017 by judgment of Supreme Court. Now, if you look at these 5 exceptions which said that these actions constitute rape, you see, in India, we used to have child marriages. And in 1860, the marriageable age was 10. The logic was the moment a girl child reaches puberty, if you get her married, then will not constitute rape. That was the exception. It was, see, 1860 was 10 years, 1891 was increased to 12 years, 1925 went to 14 years, 1940 it went to 16 years. So that finally was struck down by Supreme Court by judgment which was delivered when there is a challenge to Section 375, Exception 2. Now, this was what the state of a rape as defined, and the punishments were laid out in Section 376 then. There was no other provision apart from Section 327 of the Criminal Procedure Code, where the in-camera came in later on, because at that time there was no concept of in-camera. It was within the chambers of the judge concerned. Otherwise, it had to be an open court. If you look at Section 327 CRPC, it had to be a trial had to be an open court. In exceptional cases, the judge could allow the trial to be conducted in his chamber, which is now called in-camera. So the thing stood as such. For the first time in 1923, by reason of an international convention by the League of Nations, Section 366, which actually implored again all nations to subscribe to the concept of offences against girl child particularly. Therefore, Section 366A, capital A and B were included. You can have a look at Section 366, capital A and B, that came in by way of amendment in 1923. Let's have a look at that. 366 speaks of kidnapping, and 366A, which came in 23, was procuration of minor girl. Whoever by any means whatsoever induces any minor girl under the age of 18 years to go from any place or to do any act with intent that such girl may be, or knowing that it is likely that she will be forced or seduced to illicit intercourse with another person, shall be punishable with imprisonment which will extend to 10 years and shall also be liable to fine. So this was the first recognition of a girl child being exposed to some illegal sexual activity. And this came in 1923. And 366B was the importation of a girl from foreign country. That is not what we are concerned with right now. Now, independence happened in 1947. All these acts were adopted by the Adoption Act of Parliament. 1956 was a year in which one judgment of the Supreme Court, called judgment of the Orissa High Court, Ghanshyam Mishra, AR 56, Orissa 17. In that judgment, a school teacher was alleged to have raped a 10-year-old student. And the court said that the circumstances of such aggravating nature, that the victim is a girl of 10 years and the culprit an adult of 39 years, he took advantage of his position by inducing her to come inside the schoolroom and committed such an atrocious act, the consequence of which might as well be the complete ruin of the future of the girl. And he was sentenced to 7 years. So that was the first recorded judgment with regard to a minor girl child, with regard to a sexual offense on her body. Now, one startling judgment of the Supreme Court was Major Singh in 1966, supplementary to SCR 286. Major Singh was a very funny case where this man enters a room where a 3.5-year-old child was sleeping, and he was alleged to have undressed himself, and he had put his finger in the little girl's vagina, and hymen ruptured and broke. And the mother came and he ran away from her. So he was accosted, he was tried, and the Supreme Court finally, the matter reached the Supreme Court. He was given a 1-year sentence by the High Court, the state of Punjab came to the Supreme Court. Surprisingly, he was tried only for under Section 354, not under 376 or 375, 376. The reason being, since there was no penetration of penile penetration, which was the recognized act of defiling a woman's body, he was only tried under 354. And the Supreme Court, by a 2:1 verdict, went into this, whether such a act would constitute rape or not, held that no, it will only violate the modesty of a woman. Just can you believe it? A 3.5-year-old child subject to this torture. and not even a charge of rape leveled on the guy because the act did not permit, according to even the Supreme Court. So modesty of the woman, that was the concept used, and he was then enhanced. His sentence was enhanced by 2:1 verdict to 2 years. That was the maximum under 354. So far, so good. The 1971 Law Commission was tasked with a reform of the criminal law with regard to rape and the IPC. Now, they came up with certain soft suggestions, and that was lying again because India was then in a turmoil. You say India went into emergency, the new government came in 77. So the 71 Law Commission recommendation is not of very significant nature. Yet they said that you have to expand the definition of rape. You have to increase the punishments to minimum of 14 years. You also have to make sure that section 377 should now be reworded as buggery, not mere homosexuality, and again enhance the punishment there. Anyway, that was lying in state when this so-called infamous Tukaram case from Nagpur reached the Supreme Court. But this was a very, very, very unique case in the sense that this tribal girl had gone to the police station in Nagpur with her family and to lodge a complaint. And it is rumored that the two policemen on duty took her inside, told the family to go away, and actually raped her. Took her to a bathroom and raped her. The Sessions Court in Nagpur somehow said that the evidence of the girl was not very trustworthy and therefore acquitted these two policemen. The Nagpur High Court, by a decision, held that they were guilty of offense of rape and they were sentenced. When the matter is the Supreme Court, a 3-judge bench, gave a startling judgment. I said a very shocking bit. And they say that no, the girl was passive in their objection. I don't know where they got it from. And there was some discrepancy in the evidence. So therefore, benefit of doubt should go to the criminal. That is a normal course. But when you're conducting a rape trial, and that is what POSCO does today, the onus shifts. Earlier, the traditional criminal jurisprudence is that the state will have to prove. It's a crime against the state will have to prove, accused will have to examine 313, which is still done, but 313, and then the state will have to put the best foot forward with the prosecutors giving fuel to the case. So this major things judgment, where they were acquitted, suddenly came to the notice of 2 or 3 senior Delhi University professors. One is the legendary Dr. Upendra Bakshi, one lady called Lotika Sarkar, and Geeta Mukherjee was a parliamentarian. So they raised a hue and cry. They started writing to the Prime Minister then, I think it was Morarji Desai, and they forced the Law Commission, to be referred to this dispute of expanding the scope of Section 376 and 375. The Law Commission came up with a report in 1980, which report actually goes threadbare into the lacuna in the law insofar as at least a girl child is concerned, or even a rape victim who is a woman over 18 years of age. So that brought in that 1983 amendment. So 1983 amendment does 3 things. One is they expand Section 375. They introduce the subclause. The one that was 5 was relegated to 6, and they introduced 5, which came the heading sexual violence. And they also introduced Section 354A for the first time, and significantly 114A of the Evidence Act. I'll just run through those 3 provisions. I'll not take too much of time there. Let us take first Section 354A. So the amendment said, let me go to 375 first, I'll come to 354A. Let us take 375. If you look at 375 now, I showed the 5 exceptions. So now it says sexual offenses. Rape, a man is said to commit rape, as I said first, against a villain so and so. 5th would be now, with her consent, because that was a part of the Mathura judgment, that is the Tukaram, when at the time of giving such consent by reason of unsoundness of mind or intoxication, or the administration by him personally or through another of any stupefying or unwholesome substance, he is unable to understand the nature and consequence of that to which she gives consent. And then again sexual intercourse by a man with his own wife, so and so. And punishment for rape was altered. It became 7 years. And this police, not being a police officer, being a police officer commits rape was introduced. And it was widened. And they said 10 years, etc., etc. That was the nature of the introduction in 1983, which gave some more strength to the rape laws. If you look at section 114 of the Evidence Act, 114A was introduced then. And these are all steps in the right direction, but did not have enough teeth, according to me. If you look at 114A, capital A, as was there's so many amendments to 114. So, yes, now you come to the 1983 amendment. Says presumption as to absence of consent in certain prosecutions for rape. In a prosecution for rape under clause A or clause B or clause C or clause D or clause E or clause G of subsection 2 of section 376 of the Indian Penal Code, where sexual intercourse by the accused is proved, and the question is whether it was without the consent of the woman alleged to have been raped, and she states in her evidence before the court that she did not consent, the court shall presume that she did not consent. You understand this? The onus actually shifts onto the accused because she says with assertion under 114A that I did not give consent. It was forcible rape. For example, the normal defense taken is no, we were in a very healthy relationship. We used to have sex almost every alternate day. Suddenly one day it went sour, and now she's complaining, she's taking advantage of this situation. Some courts have held that a no means a no. But then the Delhi High Court, which was later on affirmed by Supreme Court in 2015, said a feeble no can also be a yes. So they diluted 114A to that extent to say a feeble no can mean a yes. That was a famous film director's judgment, which was again, was slammed in the social media and in press and in various discussions. Now this, it stood like this. When in 1997, the Law Commission again suggested major reforms in the rape laws. Now, mind you, each law commission was concerned more with the general rape law. There was nothing child-specific about these rape laws. So, since there was a kind of stalemate, there was a women's activist group called Shakshi in Delhi. They petitioned the Supreme Court in 1997 by way of a writ petition, and they said, see, this requires major reforms, and we need to amend the Act. The Supreme Court then found that Law Commission was not made a party. They made the Law Commission a party and referred that petition to the Law Commission for consideration. The Law Commission, by a detailed report, which was finalized in the year 2000, which was called the 84th report, came up with various suggestions to expand the definition of rape, the punishments to be doled out in such instances of rape as was mentioned in the 6th. Now, this finally came up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court called for the report. And the Sakshi petition was disposed of by a judgment in 2004, which is called the famous Sakshi judgment. And it is supplementary to SCR 2004, I think 723, I'm sorry. And the court then went into the entire gamut of its power and said that Supreme Court said that, see, one is the concept of stare decisis, that a law which has remained in force for so long need not be tinkered with, unless it is so absurd. Then notes with concern the recommendation of the Law Commission. But then in a volte-face says that, see, we cannot legislate. It is for the legislation to actually look into this. Now, Article 15 and Article 142 also gives the power. So the Supreme Court does not enact laws, it interprets. But it also has the power to recommend, like in a Maharashtra case in rent control, the Supreme Court did by way of a mandamus say that you should do this. Now there's another school of thought which says that no, you cannot issue a mandamus to the legislature to pass a law in a particular manner. So those are matters of debate where we are concerned with rape laws. The Supreme Court could have issued a mandamus in this, or could have given a direction that please put the Law Commission report, table it, and see whether the amendments as such can be carried out. So but at the end they say there was a judgment for Udmisi where certain safeguards are provided while you are conducting a rape trial. And they said, please follow the Gurmeet Singh principle. And at para 34, they say that in holding trial of a child sex abuse or rape, a screen of such or some such arrangement will be made. And questions put in cross-examination of the accused insofar as the relate to the incident should be given in writing to the president officer of the court who may put them to the victim, and that the accused and the victim cannot be confronted. So these are the large three directions they are given. The direction actually meant nothing because some courts are actually following it. So we did not ever had child-friendly courts, but some conscientious judges on the session side used to follow this in very many towns. So this also bit the dust. The Law Commission report was kept hanging. Parliament was not willing to table these reports, and this was like it was never in the zone of consideration. So they used to periodically refer it to the Law Commission. The Law Commission used to do its exercise, give suggestions, but used to fall by the wayside. Then in 2004 is the judgment. 2006 there were two acts. What was the Child Restraint Act of 2006? And even the free, there was one more act. Child Restraint Act was the first act which actually recognized that the children need protection. And that again spurred on social activist Mrs. Kirti Singh. She's a senior lawyer in the Delhi High Court. She's also heading a group of women activists. And they were tasked with the job of suggesting necessary amendments. Now, if you look at Kirti Singh's report, which is published, you can find on the net, a detailed piece-to-piece, segregation of such offences, and the punishments to be meted out was set out in that report. Now, that report was supposed to be tabled when 2 or 3 incidents happened, and the Parliament finally came up with this Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act of 2012. Now, mind you, in 2003, the Goa state legislature had actually enacted a similar law. So Goa was aware of the fact because there were not many offences, child sexual offences reported there. So Goa came up with this legislation in 2003. In a way, it was a complete legislation, but the rules did not provide for setting up child-friendly courts, etc., etc. So they had an amendment in 2009. But with the advent of this Sexual Offences Act, it is a gender-neutral act, which Pinto will elaborate on. That does seem to finally settle down. And it took us 152 years, mind you, from 1860 to 2012, 152 years for this country to recognize the necessity of having some law specific for child abuse. It is a sad state. I mean, if you look at parliamentarians also, I mean, there were children, and even today, I mean, I'm telling you that example of trying to find the easy way out of patriarchal society. The moment a child is molested, and if she is within that 16 to 18, consent, no consent, first the age certificate, then the question is put: do you marry her? Justice Deepak Mishra, of course, in the judgment, he had said nothing doing. This is his constitutional offense. To marry or not marry, that's not headache, but the offense will remain. You will have to be tried. But again, some courts do not follow that dictum. Now, 2012 Act came. 2013, suddenly, the Nirbhaya incident happened. Since I'm only in the CRPC and the IPC. And this gruesome incident of that the student girl who was killed, was not a minor, but she was brutally raped and killed on a moving bus. And that brought about civil society and various protests all over Delhi, and then it spread to the country. And the government entrusted this task of criminal law reforms with regard to rape laws to Justice Verma, Chief Justice Verma Committee, K.S. Verma, Mr. Gopal Subramaniam and other juniors helping them. And they came out with major amendments. So one suggestion I believe, subject to correction, is that chemical castration should be given, death should also be provided for. They rejected both of them. But they increased it to life in the normal rape victim. And that child-friendly, since POCSO was already in vogue, they did not traverse that area because it was already, according to them, taken care of, because that act would be in derogation and not in it would not be subsumed by the IPC. So this Criminal Amendment Act of 2013 would actually show the wholesale amendments brought to the Penal Code, Section 354. If you look at Section 376 now, the punishments have all been enhanced. And now there seem to be, in a normal rape victim, more teeth in the law. Now, how it is administered is again a question of trial, because in very many cases, study by UNICEF shows that most of the majority of the cases actually emanate from Maharashtra, Delhi, and then Madhya Pradesh. The conviction rate is only, mind you, 20 or 21%, but in some years 16 to 18%. Abysmal. But the reason is, in most of these cases, the girl child is confronted with evidence, etc., a few years go by. There's no time. There should be a time limit fit. I think they're proposing an amendment in the other act. They come and slowly change the stance under family pressure or whatever. They want to get rid of that day and get on with their life. So most of them have to retract the statement and this, that, and this, try to ease out. Now, if the prosecutor does not give evidence in the manner it should be given, then where's the question of nailing the accused? So these are pitfalls which are available. Now, there were two other incidents of major rape incidents of children in Kathua and Unnao. Again, a criminal amendment, both in the POCSO as well as the criminal IPC, was brought about in 2018. But there's one very funny inclusion in the IPC, if you have a look at it. Despite the POCSO being in force, they have introduced 376 capital A and T. And this runs contrary because there a death is also provided for under 12 years in POCSO. Here 376A says, whoever commits an offense for so which shall be in prison for the remainder of the person's natural life, and AB, punishment for rape on woman under 12 years of age. Now look at the word woman, it should be child. In 2018 also they're using the word woman for a child. So punishment for rape on woman under 12 years of age. Whoever commits rape on a woman under 12 years of age shall be punished with rigorous imprisonment for a term which shall be not less than 20 years, but which may extend to the imprisonment for life, which shall mean imprisonment for the remainder of the person's natural life. Now this runs contrary to the POCSO where a death is also provided for under 12. But again, that act says that will prevail. If a higher punishment is provided for in the POCSO Act, that will prevail. So we see that as a matter of policy, there are a few other judgments I think I should touch before I would not say leave the stage, or say leave the computer to Mr. Pinto, because we are in different times today. There are two, I'll just run through three important judgments. One is that Freddie Peets, remember, this is a Gurukul orphanage in Goa in 1980, and he was alleged, as he was running the orphanage, he was alleged to have unnatural sex with young boys aged 6, 7, and 8 in his orphanage. And he was convicted, but by the time at the age of 81, he died. So he could not serve out his sentence. So this is also one which had stirred the nation's conscience at that period, 1980-81. Then there is that judgment of Alan John Waters versus State of Maharashtra. Again, in 2001, an institutional child sexual abuse was exposed in Colaba, Mumbai, in which British nationals and former officers of the Navy, who had started this orphanage by the name of Anchorage Home, which was a center of sex tourism for many foreign nationals. Can you imagine? A sex tourism home for many foreign nationals using children as a bait. And then he was, they challenged, they were sentenced to 6 years in prison in charge of sodomy and sexually abusing 5 minor boys. The High Court acquitted them. However, the Supreme Court again restored that sentence, and he served out the sentence. And now they are put on the sex offenders registered in UK. They have returned back to the United Kingdom. So these are some of the major judgments which actually move. You see, you have judgments all over the place. These trial court judgments are based on evidence which are available to the court. And like I said, how do you marshal your evidence? And if you can't put your best foot forward, can you imagine an infant of 3-4 years to reconstruct that event that happened that day? Under the normal IPC and CRPC, it was very, very difficult. You can have this C-27 protection, you can have screens, you can have child-friendly stuff, But that is what is taken care of by the new Act. Now, in Delhi Domestic Working Women's Forum, also 1995, on SCC 14, there were these assault cases of 6 domestic workers traveling on train from Ranchi to Delhi. So this association took up the case, and the court then held them guilty of commission of rape. So we have these, if you look at the transition or the movement of the rape laws in India, while the world had the Sexual Offences Act in UK was enacted long back, 1948, and there were similar such acts in different parts of the world. India took 152 years to really come out with a codified law for children. Now, like I said, our social fabric is all to brush away everything under the carpet. You know, it's like in Hindi they say, "Ijjat loot kiya." But the concept should change now. Why should the girl always be the victim in that sense in society? The victim should be the boy who is found to be guilty, or the man who is found to be guilty of committing such offences. Rape is a very heinous crime. Like I said, you date back to the ancient text, everything. Rape is a separate chapter heading for punishments. Now, we needed a codified law in 1860 to really define what rape is, define what punishment is, however inadequate that may have been. And like I said, the marriageable age was then 10 years. So child marriage was in vogue in India. Child marriage was there till the Child Restraint Act came into really force in 2006. We have been fighting that please ban child marriages in India. There's been abuse and of so many children by reason of these child marriages. But whether they are enforced is again a matter of debate. It depends on who's complaining. If authorities get to know, they will charge them with rape. They'll charge them under that act too. So this is where we stand on the application of rape laws till, at least it stood till 2012. 2012, I will say, is a watershed year again, and the year of reawakening of senses of Indian legislature and the society at large, where now we have a recognizable penal code for offences against children. Now, before I hand over the mic to Mr. Pinto, I was talking to Mr. Om Prakash. See, if you look at the way the Britishers administered justice here in India, you should read this book. I'm not promoting this book, but this is for knowledge. Read this book, The Corporation That Changed the World. And you'll be starting to find that the British Crown empowered a public limited company limited by shares in their stock exchange to run another country, to go and conquer and run other countries, formulate laws to their benefit and administer them. So one of the famous, I'm digressing a bit, if you remember the LII case, you know, Maharaja Nand Kumar was charged with forgery of some documents and he was sentenced to death. And when the British Parliament found out, they summoned the Chief Justice. At that time, Supreme Court was in Calcutta, Fort William, till the 3 presidency courts came into, the chartered courts were enacted from 1865 onwards. So he was brought back to UK and impeached. So even the Britishers' administration of this law was very, very skewed. It was all in favor of the Europeans and the white skin. So the natives, as they used to call us, the natives, only the Babus who could toe their line and they could become the Indian English Babus, could escape the wrath of the British Empire. But the natives would be given the harshest punishment if found committing adultery, etc., etc. But the same offense committed by a white would have a restricted, low degree of punishment. So this is how we have progressed. 152 years for this act, which now Mr. Pinto will take over and explain the nitty-gritties of that act and whether we have been successful in implementing these early years. I've given a few examples which he will elaborate on. Much needs to be done. Even the rape laws, rape victims, protection of rape victims, their non-disclosure of names, etc. Everything is now being taken care of. It's always Miss X or something versus the state or versus that they are the complainant. The name is never disclosed in the judgment when they file. But some courts still make a mistake of taking the names in the judgments, and they have been struck down by the higher forums. So I think now Mr. Pinto will take over, and after he does, we can both conclude and finish the session. Thank you so much. Mr. Pinto would have to unmute.
Yes, my Article 19(1)A has been restored. It's an honor to share screen space with my learned senior, Mr. Rana Mukherjee. I'm grateful for the opportunity. I wish, ladies and gentlemen, I could say good evening, but it's not really a good evening. Not when every 15 minutes, a child is said to be sexually abused in India. So by the time this webinar is concluded, 5 to 7 children may be victims. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I for one firmly believe that a law is only as good as its implementation. And its implementation hinges on key definitions. The POCSO Act bristles with practical difficulties. Let's go down to brass tacks. For a school student, one of the many fears and hurdles to complain against a sexual predator could be the risk of their examination marks being fudged. For a parent, in extreme cases, it could be a daunting reality of finding a new school in the middle of an academic year if the environment is so vitiated, even after calling out the offender, and if the family decides that a new terrain is better than hostile undertones. This is why victims suffer in silence. This is why victims bottle up their misery. This is why we have a big mismatch between the magnitude of sexual crimes against school children and the actual complaints, and it should sound alarm bells. Ladies and gentlemen, ironically, privacy and confidentiality of victims were the two primary objectives of the Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act 2012. Has that been adequately reflected in the statute? Not quite. If survivors are to be emboldened to speak up, the Act must urgently be amended to necessitate, I would say, suspension of the alleged offender within 24 hours of the receipt of a complaint, following a preliminary inquiry, of course, adhering to the principles of natural justice, external evaluation of examination answer scripts assigned to offenders, and if sought, admission in another school of the same board at any time during the academic year. This must be allowed as a matter of right. Now, when the allegations against a few schools in Chennai recently sparked justifiable outrage, and I'm starting with the latest incidents, the nature of public discourse has rather unfortunately strayed into extraneous areas like caste and religious whataboutery, ostensibly stemming from a lack of awareness about the POCSO law. And I believe such webinars are meant to bridge that gap. Now, as I see it, there are three broad categories of offenses: sexual assault under sections 3, 5, and 9, sexual harassment under section 11, and abetment and concealment under sections 16, 19, and 20 respectively. Now, it is pertinent to note that unlike the regular criminal jurisprudence of presumption of innocence, section 29 of POCSO stipulates the presumption of guilt for sexual assault, not for sexual harassment, but for sexual assault. And this shifting of the burden of proof to that of innocence is a significant advantage for the prosecution. Now, my learned senior, Mr. Rana Mukherjee, was kind enough to share a very relevant case law. He emailed it to me. Delhi High Court in a recent bail hearing in Dharmender Singh versus State of Delhi 2020, it dealt with this aspect. And I'm going to read out for you 4 small relevant paragraphs from this judgment. That section 29 has been engrafted in the POCSO Act does not mean that the presumption of innocence, which is a foundational tenet of criminal jurisprudence, is to be thrown to the winds. If section 29 is so interpreted as to apply it to the stage even before charges are framed, it would not pass constitutional muster under Article 21 of our Constitution. 21, as you know, right to life and personal liberty, except according to procedure established by law. Because Article 21 requires that all substantive as well as procedural provisions must be reasonable, just, and fair, as held, as we know, in the Maneka Gandhi case. Such interpretation of section 29 would also render the right of the accused to a fair trial nugatory and a dead letter, which would do violence to the constitutional guarantee contained in Article 21. Applying Section 29 to bail proceedings at a stage before charges are framed would in effect mean that the accused must prove that he has not committed the offense even before he is told the precise offense he is charged with, which would again do violence to all legal rationality. In view of the above discussion and after considering the opinion of the Supreme Court and the views taken by the other high courts, this court is persuaded to hold that the presumption of guilt engrafted in Section 29 gets triggered and applies only when the trial begins. That is, after the charges are framed against the accused, not before that. The significance of the opening words of Section 29, where a person is prosecuted, is that until charges are framed, the person is not being prosecuted, but is being investigated or is in the process of being charged. Accordingly, if a bail plea is considered at any stage prior to framing of charges, Section 29 has no application, since up to that stage, an accused is not being prosecuted. Therefore, if a bail plea is being considered before charges have been framed, Section 29 has no application, and the grant or refusal of bail is to be decided on the usual and ordinary settled principles. Now, coming to a scenario where the bail plea is considered at the stage after charges have been framed, in keeping with observations of the Supreme Court, presumption of guilt contained in Section 29 would get triggered and will have to be taken into consideration. In this case, of course, he was given conditional bail and he had to surrender his passport and all that. Now, this is a judgment rendered, as I said, by the Delhi High Court in that bail hearing case. Now, did you know that it is not just a school or any institution that can report the alleged crime to the police? Section 19(1) of POCSO places the onus on, it uses the term any person who has apprehension or who has knowledge of an offense committed or is likely to be committed. Now, contextually, any person could include whistleblowers, it could include classmates, it could include seniors, it could include other teachers, it could include parents, it could include alumni associations. The statute lays such significant emphasis on reporting offenses that actually even penalizes non-reporting with what? 6 months imprisonment and or fine for individuals, and a higher onus is placed on institutions, twice that penalty for institutional default under Section 21(1) and 21(2). Now, there is a bone of contention that will inevitably crop up in trials, and that is the interpretation of the term knowledge of the occurrence of the offense. Knowledge, does it necessitate written complaints or oral reports or third-party information passed on or hearsay or rumors or social media posts? The Act is surprisingly silent on this aspect. Okay, it is surprisingly silent, which is why I have advocated reforms and tweaking of this Act, although it lays down a mechanism of reporting cases to the police. Now, under the defining Section 2(2) of POCSO, there is a reference to falling back on definitions in the Indian Penal Code, the Juvenile Justice Act, and the Information Technology Act for such gaps. However, the term knowledge is not defined in the Penal Code or on the statutes in question here. That's a glaring omission, in my opinion, subject to correction by my learned senior. The Supreme Court, ladies and gentlemen, in Jyoti Prasad versus State of Haryana, had held that a person can be supposed to know when there is a direct appeal to his senses. Now let's go to a dictionary. Black's Law Dictionary states, if one by exercise of reasonable care would have known a fact that he deemed to have had constructive knowledge. However, in a criminal trial, actual knowledge along with sexual intent in such cases would be questions of fact. Ladies and gentlemen, another glaring omission is a statutory timeline to report incidents to the police. In the case on point, in fact, this was an interesting case where there was an alleged sexual assault and the parents reported it to the school at about 8 o'clock in the morning. By 10 o'clock, they are in the police station and they filed a complaint against the school for not reporting it to the police. Now, the Chhattisgarh High Court in this case, Kamal Prasad Patade versus State of Chhattisgarh, this was in 2016, held that the head of the institution is entitled to and should be allowed sufficient reasonable time to find out the correct facts by making an inquiry at the institutional level before reporting the matter. Now, that is why I say that it is extremely important, it is crucial and critical that victims be made aware of legal protection of their identity under Section 23 of POCSO. They should be aware of the non-intimidating in-camera, at least on paper, nature of the trial, and a slew of judicial reassurances, right from the landmark Supreme Court decision in state of Punjab versus Gurmeet Singh, 1996, to a more relatively recent division bench of the Honorable Madras High Court in Aidwa versus state of Tamil Nadu, 2014. Also, as far as witnesses are concerned, and this should embolden people to come forward and complain, under the proviso to Section 161 of the Code of Criminal Procedure, no girl child, no lady, or a male child below the age of 15, or a man above 65 years can be summoned to a police station. This is the law. Whether it's been implemented, whether it's being followed or not is a separate issue. I know that in several cases it's not being followed. In such cases, their inquiry as witnesses can only be conducted at their residences, where they ordinarily reside. Those are the words used. Similarly, because usually summons are sent under 161 and 91(2). Under Section 91(2) of the CRPC, Criminal Procedure Code, summons for the production of any documentary evidence would be deemed to be complied with if they are sent to the investigating officer without necessarily appearing in person, especially during this COVID-19 scenario with lockdowns. If you have documentary evidence, merely sending it across to the police is deemed compliance. Now, my learned senior, in fact, was again so kind to send me several research findings, and his office had sent me, a National Law School Bangalore research. It analyzed 667 judgments between 2013 and 2015, and it revealed that alleged victims turned hostile in a staggering 67.5% of the cases. How much? 67.5% of cases, and testified against the accused only in 26.7 cases, 26.7% of the cases. Then there's another very credible survey done by the Kailash Satyarthi Children's Foundation, the KSCF. They did an analysis of the pattern of disposal of POCSO cases by the police from 2017 to 2019. And it was based, of course, on data published by the National Crime Records Bureau. Between 2017 and 2019, hold your breath, between 2017 and 2019, 2/5 of POCSO cases were closed by the police after investigation without filing the charge sheet. 2/5 of the cases did not go past the charge sheet stage. Why? Because in most cases, and this is tragic, victims are either poor and marginalized, or they are related to the alleged offenders, and they turn hostile during the trial due to coercion or due to inducements. This is a reality. And the conviction rate, as my learned senior said, is about, I think it's marginally over, it's gone up marginally over the years, but still hovers around less than 30%, which I think is a crying shame. Now, let me take you back to another judgment that sparked outrage in the country. You know what I'm referring to. A 12-year-old girl was whisked away by a man more than thrice her age to his house, promising to give her a fruit, a guava. The pedophile was reported to have pressed her breasts. When the victim raised an alarm, he fled out of his residence and bolted the door from inside. But hearing her cries for help, her mother somehow managed to rescue the child miraculously. One would imagine that the culprit would be convicted under the POCSO Act. It's a statute that views sexual exploitation and abuse of children as heinous crimes, because it's imperative that the law operates in a manner that the best interest, these are very crucial terms, ladies and gentlemen, that the best interest and welfare of the child are of paramount importance at every stage. Brave words, but in practice, what do we see? The Nagpur bench of the Bombay High Court in the Satish versus State of Maharashtra 2021 recent case, which I referred to, held that the act of, hold your breath, okay, if you've not read of this, you'll be shocked. If you've read about this, you'll be further infuriated. the act of pressing the breast of the child aged 12 in the absence of any specific detail as to whether the top was removed or whether he inserted his hand inside the top and pressed the breast would not fall in the definition of sexual assault. I was horrified when I saw this. What has justifiably sparked outrage is the finding that there was no, note these words, there was no skin-to-skin contact with sexual intent to bring the offense under the rubric of physical contact. With all due respect, in my opinion, this negates the objective of the POCSO Act, which is meant to ensure the healthy physical, emotional, intellectual, and social development of the child. What's the point in having all these statements of objectives and reasons if you have such ridiculous, outrageous judgments? Thankfully, it's been appealed now, Supreme Court. Now, analyze this provision, Section 7. That's why I spoke about definitions in the beginning. Section 7 defines sexual assault. What is the relevant extract? Whoever touches the vagina, penis, anus, or breast of a child, or does any act with sexual intent which involves physical contact. Now, here's the catch. The term physical contact is not defined in the POCSO Act. I say it again. The term physical contact is not defined in the POCSO Act. Under Section 2.2, as I said earlier, if any term is not defined, they say go back to the IPC, go back to the Juvenile Justice Act, go back to the Information Technology Act, and guess what? It doesn't figure there as well in those enactments. Now, a common sense approach is called for by the judge when faced with such a situation when there's a glaring omission in the act. I'm surprised this has not been flagged so far. When a stranger presses a child's breast in the privacy of his room, will he do that without sexual intent? Cannot sexual intent be most obviously inferred from that act? Now, talk of circumstantial evidence. Taking the child away to his secluded home on a pretext points to his mens rea, open and shut case. Crime wins, ladies and gentlemen, an opportunity. Now, had the child not screamed, who knows what his fellow may have done? What if he had proceeded to disrobe the child? What if he had proceeded to commit rape or attempt? It is not known if the guava offered was eaten partially or if it was sent for forensic analysis to check if it was laced with sedatives, because this is a common modus operandi. It would have shed more light, of course, on the perpetrator's real intent. The chain of events would have attracted the words any other act in the section. Why was this not considered? Now, as a lawyer, I do find the no skin to skin argument to let the accused off the hook quite perverse. As a father, I find it revolting. The legal maxim that the punishment must fit the crime was cited. What about the psychological scarring and trauma of the victim? Does the absence of skin to skin contact make the act any less abhorrent? In the case in question, the predator has only been convicted under 354 of the IPC for assault of a woman with the intention to outrage her modesty. He didn't use POCSO. Although the maximum penalty prescribed is a jail term of up to 2 years, he has been sentenced to a year's rigorous imprisonment along with wrongful confinement under 342 IPC, carrying the same punishment. But as I said earlier, this has been appealed. Now, had the POCSO conviction not been overturned in this appeal, the accused would be facing minimum imprisonment of 3 years, extendable to 5 years, and fine under Section 8 under POCSO. Now, I'll take you through a few Supreme Court rulings. And Supreme Court in Independent Thought versus Union of India, 2017, it had observed that of much greater importance and significance is Section 42A of the POCSO Act. What does 42A say? It provides that the provisions of the Act are an addition to, as Mr. Mukherjee pointed out rightly, are an addition to and not in derogation of the provisions of any other law in force, which includes the IPC. Moreover, the section provides that in the event of any inconsistency between the provisions of POCSO and any other law, the provisions of POCSO shall have an overriding effect, the principle of a special law, overriding effect of POCSO. Now, it is not the quantum of punishment, let's be fair and let's be frank. It's not the quantum of punishment that really rankles in these cases. It is the message or a lack of deterrence that this verdict has sent out. What is that message? Be you ever so perverse, a special law to protect children may not touch you, skin to skin or otherwise. But I said mercifully that judgment has been appealed. Now, there was another case in Chennai, and I presume that's the reason why there's been a string of cases, shocking cases in Chennai, which is why my learned senior in Chennai, Mr. Om Prakash, suggested this topic. Not long ago, in a very prominent school, private school in Chennai, a horrifying case which sort of struck too close to home, I would say. That's been the chorus after a dastardly rape of a child for over 7 months in an apartment complex in Chennai. For over 7 months, this happened. The justifiable outrage has triggered vigilantism by lawyers in the court and furious posts on the social media, which is understandable, calling for instant justice. Whenever you have these shocking crimes, there is this thing for instant justice. In other words, encounter, police encounter. At the heart of such heinous crimes that are being perpetrated so brazenly and with, I would say, chilling regularity, despite all the knee-jerk reaction every time, is a need for deterrence, I mean the big D word. And the Criminal Law Amendment Act 2018, which was passed, had addressed the collective cry for justice through these new sections in the IPC 376AB, which prescribes a minimum punishment of 20 years, rigorous imprisonment, and up to death penalty for raping a child of less than 12 years. Section 370, yes, you're right, life imprisonment. And there are laws and laws, old and new, but I think there's a really confusion over that. I'll let my learned senior clarify that point.
No, it says 20, that's why I said it's 20 years.
20 years.
Which is again, POSCO says death. So there is a conflict between the two.
Conflict, yeah, but then they say overriding effect of POXO.
But yeah, that's right. But if you can look at section 7 and 8 of POXO, you will find out that even the skin-to-skin touching of the breast is punishment of 3 years. That's what the Nagpur High Court heard. You just have a look at section 7. I'm sorry.
There are laws and laws, ladies and gentlemen,
yes,
old too, but where is the deterrence? And that's the question we keep asking us. Those who oppose the death sentence on the ground of no proven deterrence must suggest an alternative measure to instill fear of the law. Because the possibility of the perpetrators killing their victims due to those who are mindful of the penal consequences do not commit rape unless they are really hardened criminals. To such beasts, no deterrence can work. But to first-time offenders, the death penalty, I mean, this is what I'm advocating this. The death penalty is likely to weigh on their perverted minds. The Supreme Court in Mukesh and other versus State of NCT Delhi, better known as the Nirbhaya case, tell that the measure of punishment in a given case must depend upon the atrocity of the crime, the conduct of the criminal, and the defenseless and unprotected state of the victim. Justice demands that courts should impose punishment fitting the crime so that the courts reflect public abhorrence of the crime. And it suggested drawing up of a balance sheet of aggravating and mitigating circumstances attending to the commission of the offense and then striking a balance. But another landmark judgment in Shankar Kisan Rao Kade versus State of Maharashtra, the apex court laid down the grounds which weighed with the court in confirming the death penalty, and these include, as you know, the diabolical, brutal, depraved, gruesome nature of the crime, public abhorrence that shocks the judicial conscience of society, premeditated perpetration, defenseless state of the victim, and the menace or threat to society that the accused pose. I have no hesitation in my mind that the Chennai child rapist is committed a rarest of rare crime that calls for the hangman's noose. Now, the Criminal Law Amendment Act may have provided for speedy investigation, I'm told 2 months, and a speedy trial within 6 months. But the rigmarole of appeals in higher courts leading right up to presidential pardon for convicts on death row is way too time-consuming to inspire enough confidence, public confidence in the rule of law. While public anguish, this is important to note this, while we are all suitably angry, justifiably, understandably angry, while public anguish exists, it is important to pin down the real accused, because not all those who are named as accused may be guilty. The possibility of innocent people being implicated or some real culprits at large cannot be ruled out, and only a proper trial will establish guilt. Remember, we're not a banana republic. We gave even the most dreaded criminal, like terrorist like Ajmal Kasab, who was caught on camera gunning down innocent people, we gave him a fair trial. And also, this is something that I think is lost sight of: the right to privacy of the victim. Circulating, we saw that after the Katwa case. We saw it even in the Nirbhaya case initially. Circulating information about the name of a school or apartment complex is an offense under, this is for rape cases, sexual offenses, under 228A IPC, 2-year jail term. Under section 23(2) of POXO, this also shields the identity of the victims. Now, I must give you a very interesting case that took place when I was in NDTV and I was reporting news. It was in Trichy, where a child in conflict with law was alleged to have assisted his doctor father in performing a cesarean operation. Things went wrong there. So I remember traveling to Trichy from Chennai, and there were a lot of other journalists, photographers who were trying to click. This boy was wearing, the child was wearing a cap to obviously hide his face. So there were people who went and pulled off the cap and took his photo. They showed his house, which had the name board, which is a dead giveaway. And I told them, look, you can't, under the act, in those days it was, I think, 21 Juvenile Justice Act. You cannot reveal the identity. It is not just, by identity, it's not just the name of the person or the photograph of the person. Anything else that will lead to the establishment of the identity. So it could be the name of the school, it could be the class, it could be a name board outside a house, it could be the parents' names, it could be some social media profile, all that. Now, this these crimes shattered to smithereens the notion of safety, and especially in this particular case in Chennai, that child rape case, in a gated community, where it was a case of the proverbial fence eating the crop. Who will watch the watchman? Okay. Now, this is something that I don't know why the different police departments have. I think IG welfare in Tamil Nadu police deals with this. They control the private security agencies. I'm saying this because the private security guard was booked on this case, the child rape case, schoolgirl in Chennai, under the Private Security Agencies Regulation Act 2005. And you also have a state enactment, Tamil Nadu Private Security Agency Rules 2008. No guard must be above 65 years. No guard, this is followed in the breach. No guard must be drunk on duty. Again, several times followed in the breach. No guard must have criminal antecedents. Never done. No checking is done. Background checks for maids, optional, but advisable. Police clearance for security guards is mandatory, but they are not followed. If these guards commit a crime on the premises, they are posted. That constitutes a ground for cancellation of the security agency's license itself under Section 13 of that Act. But how many of them are registered with the state police? It is like your, unregistered telemarketers who call you up and disturb you in the middle of the afternoon, and you complain to your mobile service provider saying that, look, I'm registered on Do Not Disturb, yet they are calling me. And he says they are unregistered telemarketers. What could we do about them? So many of these agencies are unregistered. So how do you actually police them? So these are practical difficulties. If there's no license in the first place, where's the question of cancellation? And this is despite the law that makes functioning without a license an offense under Section 4, with an imprisonment up to a year and fine under Section 21 of the Private Security Agencies Regulation Act. Now, I can go on and on. I know it's 6:15 already, Saturday evening. I have a few solutions apart from what I had suggested earlier about, suspension of the alleged offender, especially in schools, since that's really, engaging our attention today, very vital. I know some schools have taken good measures to, proactive measures to put systems in place, checks and balances. And I hope others also take the cue from them. Going by the pattern and the rate of crime, I think certain suggestions could be implemented, like making, in fact, I sent out this link of this webinar to many senior police officials, including the DGP and Commissioner, asking them to also probably suggest that the younger officers could be part of this webinar. I'm not sure if they've logged in. But going by the pattern and rate of crime, I think installation of CCTVs in all new residential and commercial buildings and elevators, common areas, and blind spots should be mandatory. I think we should amend the Real Estate Regulation and Development Act, RERA Act 2016. That would be useful. And the CCTV rule can be applied to all old buildings too. Just like in Tamil Nadu, we had rainwater harvesting that was made compulsory for everyone. And residents' welfare associations can take it up. These CCTVs are as important as planting saplings or composting garbage, let's face it. Now, secondly, I think the judicial process must be made more child-friendly. I am told that many courts have a rather vulnerable witness deposition room. That is where the victims interact with the judges or prosecutors, and that process is lengthy and tedious. So many of them are kind of intimidated by the very process itself. That process itself is a punishment for the offender, for the complainant. So, and the victims. The prosecutors also must be sensitized in the manner of interacting. The social workers should be present there, but they should be more sensitive, and there should be better coordination between the victims and prosecutors. I'm told that's a lacuna that needs to be plugged. Thirdly, I feel schools must have a weekly period for psychological counseling, which is very important. Lastly, this has always been my pet suggestion. Self-defense must become a compulsory subject and basic legal awareness. Two things: self-defense, basic legal awareness. I know many schools have yoga and other activities. Why don't you have karate, Krav Maga, so many martial arts? Make it compulsory, unless, of course, the child has some physical difficulty. Make it compulsory. This is far more productive than slanging matches and hashtag wars. And I'm just waiting for a day when a school kid trained in martial arts whacks the daylights out of an abuser. And that should be in reality, not just in serials like Family Man season 2. Okay, so these are my thoughts. I thank you for the opportunity again, and we're open for questions. And I think my learned senior has,
I just need to come in for just 2 minutes.
Yes.
I left POCSO for Mr. Pinto. That's the two areas of concern which I told him also. You see, what does an infant of, let's say, 6 to 1 year or 15 months or 20 months is abused? Maybe by incest, even the boy child. And then after 6 or 8 months, it is discovered that they have some medical issue, that has some problems. How is a child going to really depose and pinpoint a person who is close to the family, who he or she trusts, to come and depose it?
Now, what if they're staying in the same place?
Yes,
that's what I'm saying. Staying in a joint family.
I'm going a step ahead. That it's in the family. So this is one area of concern which is not being addressed properly by the Act.
Yes.
How do you take care of these situations? What if there was a timeline which you were speaking of? What if that medical condition or that, let us say, growth in the child's anus or the vagina comes to the fore after 6, 7, 8 months? So you'll have to do a lot of DNA tracking, this, that, and other. Those are also which should be provided for.
I noticed another thing. I'm glad you raised that point, which is why, in fact, on the social media, many people raise it and ask questions, why are you bringing it up after so many years? See, many people at that time may not have been aware that these are actually offenses and these shouldn't have been done. So many of them thought that, okay, this was something that somebody was doing. But now when they know that there are criminal penal consequences, then they are woken up, and in fact, there's a sense of outrage and anger that, look, this happened to me. Bloody hell, how dare this person do that? And then even if a conviction may not be possible because of the time lag and limitation and other things, even then, at least they want to name and shame them. So I can understand the anger that comes out. The name and
other point is, look at the insensitivity of the legislature. You see, independent thought was a matter where I had to unfortunately appear for the central government. I was trying to defend the law, and while doing so, I discovered this 10 years, 1860, that the marriageable age was 10 years before consent. Does not violate. Now that kept on being amended till 1955 or 60 when it was made 15. So that was subject matter of challenge in independent thought, which is reported in 2017 10 SSC page 800. And what the Supreme Court does is, takes upon itself the task of, trying to harmonize all the acts and find out. And they find that just have 375 exception 2 for a minute, if you all don't mind. If you have it in front, you can flash it. 375 exception 2 said that sexual intercourse or sexual acts by a man with his own wife, please mark the word one wife, the wife not being under 15 years of age is not rape. But this was absolutely contrary to the POCSO concept, contrary to the Prohibition of Child Marriage Act. So the Supreme Court said, how could the legislature still keep it? And told me to make a search in the Parliament records. So I had to summon the files, and I was startled to find out, apart from one member of the TMC, nobody objected to removal of this. Nobody said that please remove it. That Saugata Rai, I believe, Dr. Saugata Rai was the only one who raised an objection that please increase it to 80. And Supreme Court had to deliver a 50 or 70-page judgment in independent thought, or more than that. Both judges concurring and gave me the lashing of my life when I was trying to weakly defend the government. And I started off by saying, I hope one day they amend it. No, the reason why I'm pointing this out, they struck down that explanation too. The latest edition, you see, the legislature could have done while they were amending 2018 Act to say that from this day, this section, though the Supreme Court struck it down, we strike it from the statute books. It is still there in the statute book. You have to read the judgment to find out that the exception 2 has been struck down by the Supreme Court. How insensitive these people are. There's a collective thought of 542 people sitting in Parliament, twiddling their thumbs, and not having a care for this child victims or rape victims.
No, I think also
what is going on? I mean, this is something. There's a total disconnect between reality, actuality, and what is being debated in Parliament. So Pinto has been inside all these parliament debates, and he knows how shallow these debates are, how acts are not being discussed at all.
I think there's
such
a
a
lack
serious
of
issue.
expertise,
Yes,
because
yes.
there are several NGOs which do excellent work. Like, for instance, child sexual abuse. You have an organization called Tulir in Chennai, where Vidya Reddy, her organization does excellent work. So these organizations should be part of the lawmaking
Or
bodies.
even
so
schools, they should be brought to the school compulsorily once a month. Sensitize students. There are
Yes.
you see, they have people of all sorts. You can't. It depends on the family background, depends on the criminal mindset of a child. I'm talking of a child today because, or of a, let's say, teenager, someone who's blossoming to be a young man or woman. Both sides, now it is gender neutral. So therefore, I mean, we have to really, like every time the social, what is it called? Social bodies took up these causes and there was change brought about. It's high time that, this long hiatus of, let's say, 10, 12, 15 years does not again occur. If there's lacuna in the act, please amend it straight away. Child-friendly court, that is why in that other matter, Sumoto matter, Supreme Court has taken upon itself. It has laid a mandate that any place where there are more than 100 reported instances of such violence of children, there should be one designated special court judge assigned to that. Governments are not listening. They ask for reports. The matter has been pending in Supreme Court. So before we end this discussion, I'll just speak to cite two
The same thing even with domestic violence courts. Like, there's one for every district in Tamil Nadu. I think Chennai has 2. So these are woefully inadequate. The number of courts.
The judges are also not sensitized. They treat them as regular criminal cases. So just 2 quotes from 2 famous gentlemen. One is the Sheldon Kennedy, which I set out there. Justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are. Please mark these words. Those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are. And Nelson Mandela said, the true character of a society is revealed in how it treats its children. So your treating of your own children by the society would actually reveal your true identity and your sensitivity towards a child. So I always go back. That's why when I did the last talk, what about young infants of up to 5 years? What do they know of the world? And when they are sexually abused, where do you expect them to really come up and start, unless only they're discovered accidentally by either the mother or the father or someone else or a relative who will take up the cause, and then that relative is put severe questioning. Therefore, 146 of the Evidence Act, which was amended in 2002, I'll just read that. It was inserted in 2002. Provided that in a prosecution for rape or attempt to commit rape, it shall not be permissible to put questions in the cross-examination of the prosecutrix as to a general immoral character. This was used in the Tukaram case. A defense was that she was habituated to having sex with people. So there was a 2-finger test which used to be carried out on rape victims. Can it be done on a child? Should it be done? Though you have outlawed it. But there are, doctors also do it. Once they do it, how do you control all this? So these are the lacunas. These are where we have to step in. Civil society has to really step in and tell the government time and again that something more needs to be done for at least the children abused of, victims of sexual abuse, etc., etc. So this is how I think me and Mr. Pinto are very happy to share. Like I said, the computer space with Mr. Pinto. And
before we proceed, we have Justice P.N. Prakash having joined the session.
I see.
I know definitely because of your various words you would have had been thought-provoking. I think Justice wanted to have a few words also.
Oh, please.
Yes, thank you, Om Prakash. Mr. Rana, you're very informative. But I just would like to share 2 thoughts with you.
Yes.
One thought is, you people have been saying that there are so many acquittals, etc., etc. But the real problem as a judge we face in the court is age group of 16 to 18 girls in the rural areas fall in love with 20 and 20 or 21, that adolescent, that age, they run away and go and they get married. And those boys are slapped with POCSO cases and they are arrested. And at a later point of time, after she becomes 18, she turns hostile, gets married to him. This is the real happening. I am the chairman of the POCSO thing in Madras, in Tamil Nadu. So I know the statistics. This is a staring statistics. I think we should have to do something about it. Either we should give powers to the special judges for compounding the offenses where he finds that this was a case of love. Otherwise, there's no, because we cannot prevent adolescent youngsters from, see, we can't keep moralizing them and saying that no, running away is unethical, immoral, all these stories. Love doesn't know to think. All right. Next is Mr. Pinto. You are saying you are taking about the Nagpur judge. Please understand, Mr. Pinto, she is an aberration. She is an aberration, and one swallow will not make a summer. And the moment she gave the judgment, Supreme Court stopped her confirmation and sent her out. So please don't compare that with, I can say with certainty, as far as my state is concerned, my special judges are very, very sensitive. So we are all very clear about it. And the way my judge conducted the Ayanavaram trial, about which you said, and the judgment she wrote, it's a masterpiece judgment. And that lady has not been elevated as High Court judge here. All right, we know how to do it. Next is, you say the death sentence should be given. Please understand, with this sort of corrupt police and false complaints being given, it's very difficult for us to sustain a death sentence. You please read my judgments if you have time and care to see how I forced to even convert, not able to even sustain conviction, much less death sentence. So this is the way our system is functioning. So it's very dangerous to come into a public platform and say, put death sentence, make it thing. Lastly, on a lighter side, you said everybody should be taught karate. Unfortunately, a karate master has been caught for Boxo case and now he's in jail. So I really do not know how many karate masters are going to come and teach karate to school children. This is all the
I just come in for a minute.
I also would like to say, like the karate master, I hope even the Nagpur judges are, one scholar doesn't.
No, I have an issue with that. I'll tell you why. See what happens tomorrow. Mr. Prakash would understand. You'll realize there are certain which we find stark judgments. But what if it's upheld by the higher court? What happens then? There are many cases when it's upheld by the higher courts. Like he said that, what happened to 16 to 18. Justice Deepak Mishra, when he was in court, he said that no, it constitutes an offense. Even if you marry, you have to be tried. There is an area of concern, 16 to 18. He's correct. Justice Prakash is correct. But again, like I said, Chief Justice, the then Chief Justice, as he's retired now, he said why didn't you marry and granted him bail. So there was a huge furor again. These are things which are practically, which Justice Prakash pointed out. How do you deal with such situations where the 16 to 18, where the girl child is also ready, but the striking down of the 375 exception 2 makes it difficult for courts to take a step aside and then say that very well, for these 2 years when she's a minor, crime is committed, so he'll be punished. So these are fine balance techniques which the courts will have to. There's an alternate sentence provided, they'll have to give the alternate sentence of fine, and like you said, compounding. That has to be thought of by the legislature also. Whether it can be compounded really in that age group of 16 to 18, where a girl actually is fully developed, her senses are ready, though she's a minor. Under law, she's a minor because she's under 18. So these are difficulties which will have to be worked out, and sensitization. But what Mr. Pinto actually meant was the Singapore model, that you gave everybody military training for 2 years. Whether it works or not is something else, but at least people. But how do you literally train an infant who's being sexually abused? By the time she or he gets trained, if such a regime is introduced in India, the offense would have been committed. So these are issues which needs a larger debate, a larger discussion, maybe with progress of time. As Justice Prakash said, some judgments are there which are really lucid and very good. They will apply those thought process. The legislature actually is involved in too many other things and taking care of child offences, etc. So it's for the courts to step in and take charge. That's what my thing, right? But what Justice Prakash says.
Nothing. Thank you.
Okay.
Excellent. Excellent. Very nice. I'll take leave.
Okay. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much.
As Justice Prakash stepped in, we also have the thought process of looking at on the negative side of any kind of enforcement which comes into place. In fact, there had been so much of comments by some of the participants pointing out that as we speak about the evil effects and the manner in which the law seeks to address it, there is always an abuse part which is happening. Any provision being abused or any prosecution being abused. So that was rightly being pointed out by Justice P.N. Prakash.
That was a marshalling of evidence. If you don't put that witness turns hostile, what is the court supposed to do? Court cannot then step in and say, no, I'll have to punish you. I mean, it's a question of proof in court. That's where the difficulties are. It will remain. This will always remain. Like I said, family pressure. The family pressurizes the child, no, how do we get you married? You know, it's a usual social problem. How do you get you married? Hush it up. Your name is not disclosed in any proceeding. Quietly get on with your life. Just send them out to some other city, and in the hope that you will finally settle down and have a good life. These are problems. These are social problems. These acts are to address social problems. So in doing so, they'll have to iron out the pieces. That's finally in the long run.
Yes, one of the participants.
I respectfully disagree with the proposition that you ask the offender to marry the victim.
I know, that's it. That's what is happening
with such things. Whoever comes up with these suggestions.
At least that's why I said. That's what Mishra said. The offense is committed. It's an offense against the state. So he did not allow. He said the trial will go on. You do what you want. You want to get married, please get married. But the offense will remain. If you read the judgment of state of Madhya Pradesh, he was very caustic in his judgment. So these are.
No, I also made the point about capital punishment. I think it's been quoted out of context. The comments. I said that it made it very clear that in capital punishment, if capital punishment is advocated, there's a flip side to it. That many of the victims would be emotionally blackmailed by the family members to say that, look, what's going to happen to him if you go ahead and give your testimony. So many of them are hushed up in that manner. Okay, so I think that should be read in context. And I snapped my ties with the mainstream media 9 years ago. I made that transition. So I wouldn't like to be referred to as a primetime debate when I do a legally researched presentation. I think that would be slightly harsh and unfair.
You have to have that broad chin.
Yeah, that's fine. I think it's a bit unfair to say that, to refer to it as a primetime debate when a lot of thought has gone into this. So I mean, it's my take, and I think it's a free. I think everybody is entitled to their opinion, but this is my response.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chandy. I'd just like to read out a few comments which had come. Our participant Meera Ravikumar has said, how about making safety and gender sensitivity lessons compulsory in school curriculum?
Yeah, I had also made that suggestion. That's one of the suggestions. I think that's a good suggestion, which she's also agreed with. She's added on to, I think, gender sensitivity, which I think gender studies should be part of the curriculum. I mean, some of the things that we learn in school, for instance, in mathematics compulsorily up to class 10, calculus and all that. Instead, you can learn something more meaningful, legal awareness, gender sensitivity studies. And yes, even if karate masters are a thing, I think we should have martial arts. Let's have stricter screening for all these physical training, PT masters and karate masters, but let's not throw the baby with the bathwater.
Then we have a participant, Vijay Ganeshan, saying primary prevention would be awareness among all sections of society is the need of the hour. Especially at educational institutions, it has to be mandated. She also goes on to add, school management should own up providing safe spaces and respond appropriately when disclosures are made. Parents should ask if the schools have a child protection policy and if they have a response mechanism in place when a disclosure is made. So these had been her comments in the.
I think that touches upon a very important aspect, especially with the recent instances. It's not just the number of, now of course you don't have state ranks, there are, a number of centums that they get, but also these child protection policies should be on the minds of parents when they seek admission in schools. Whether it's a safe place, it has to be a safe place before a center of excellence. Safety and excellence don't always go together. And that's why I raised this point, the lacuna in the law, which very few have pointed out, that how do you actually, what should be the mechanism of a complaint? Should it be a written complaint or can it be just an oral complaint? If it is an oral complaint, especially since non-reporting to the police invites penal consequences, if it's an oral complaint, it's then your word against my word. The complainant will say, I told you on this date. The institution will say, you never told us. So maybe it has to be some kind of a written complaint, in the law, hemmed into the law, because right now the law is silent on that.
Suggestions just come in.
So it should also be part of the
curriculum. Yeah, that is very interesting. Possibly to introduce as a school curriculum. That is a very good suggestion.
Yeah, that is where the participant said it is ultimately owning up the responsibility. If you get sensitized to the issue and you take up the responsibility, that adds more value. Now, I will only like to invite two of our participants to have a cue. One is Mr. Suresh Babu, who wanted to have one point of view.
But it was a good lecture by Mr. Rana and subsequently by Sanjay. But however, one question which I would like to hint upon is, in the recent days, we have found a number of complaints, at least in the city of Chennai, which has got generated as belated complaints. all these students who are given complaints were ex-students and they're given complaints. Now, of course, the complaints were the nature of making out a cognizable case for the prosecution to take up the case, register the case immediately and proceed with the investigation. Well, most of these allegations were against teachers whom are respectable persons in the society. At least we consider them to be respectable persons of the society is because they are the persons who have molded you and I. So that honor and respect is going to the teachers. By and large, we always believe in Lalita Kumari's judgment, wherein we say that once a complaint discloses a cognizable offense, register a case thereon. If preliminary inquiry is required only in cases where the Honorable Supreme Court has given some guidelines. Now, in these belated complaints, won't it be justifiable in order to have any misuse of any complaint or the misuse of women laws to have a detailed preliminary inquiry, particularly when the persons targeted are elite persons of society, like teachers and so on and so forth? One. The second question which I want to ask is, 19.1 provides anyone to give a complaint, and 19.7 gives a saving clause on the guise of good faith. When those two things are there, of course, a person comes forward, whomsoever it may be the victim or any person known to the victim or who has knowledge of the particular offense, comes and gives a complaint. But what is contrary is section 22. It also prosecutes wrong complaint. So 19.7 and 22 are contradictory to each other. So there is always a fear, psychosis amongst the individuals who want to deliberately or genuinely want to bring to the eyes of law the offense. They are also under some threat or torture whatsoever, as section 19.7 and 22 are contrary to each other. This is, I think, how are we going to face futuristic such misuses with these provisions and non-compliance of preliminary inquiry as per, in belated cases?
Yeah, I think this, the time lag, the point of limitation, it's hit by Article 20, as you know, the Constitution. So no one can be prosecuted for an offense which at the time of its commission was not an offense. The POCSO came into being in 2012. Then obviously, if you're talking about something that happened, 15 years ago, then that's hit by that constitutional provision. Although now people are talking about historical reporting, I think the law has to evolve there. You're very right about that contradiction and the penalty for false complaints. But I think it's seldom really invoked in many cases. I don't think it's invoked in many cases. Here, the problem really is the nature of the complaint. I think the Act should very clearly say that it should be a written complaint. It should be either an email. That maybe this institution should have a particular email ID. Because unlike the POSH Act, POCSO is different. I think there's this bit of a confusion between POSH and POCSO. Under POSH, you have to have an internal complaints committee. Under POCSO, there is no such statutory requirement, if I'm right. Correct me if I'm wrong. There's no such statutory requirement under POCSO. All it says is, when you come to know of it, when you have knowledge of it, complain to the authorities. The authorities meaning the juvenile justice unit or the local police. So there it's only a question of reporting. There's no inquiry to be done by the institution. It's straight away reporting to the police. So since non-reporting is visited with penal consequences, we need to have a very clear-cut mechanism in the Act itself as to how the complaint should be made. It should be a written complaint by speed post, registered post. It should be an email to a registered email ID, or there should be some acknowledgement given. Yes, confidentiality can be maintained. And I also suggested, the practical aspects. I don't think these practical aspects figure in 9 p.m. TV debates. So I was very surprised again. So many of the practical aspects, the problem is that most people, we view things in isolation. We suddenly tune into something and say, oh my God, he's not saying this. Oh my God, he's saying that. So unless we view things in their entirety, some of the crucial aspects are left out. So I think this slew of suggestions were given by both Mr. Rana, Mr. Mukherjee and me. And yes, these are loopholes in the Act. The Act, POCSO was amended a couple of times. I think it calls for another urgent amendment where some of these loopholes, and as you rightly pointed out, that contradiction between 2022 and 19.7, I think these should be reconciled in some way.
But limitation is provided for in the CRPC. There's these are what is happening in the Me Too cases. In all these Me Too cases, people are coming after 8-10 years. They are applying 473 to say that extension of period of limitation in certain cases. So 473 allows the court to give an extended period of limitation of filing complaints. Whether that will be available to POCSO cases, again, matter of debate. But in Me Too cases, they're applying that concept. 470, that in a position of power, I could not complain. I'm coming up now after 8 or 10 years. For example, there's some film actors who have complained with one of America against some notable actors today. So these are issues which need to be reconciled again. Limitation is one issue. Or how does a child, offense against a child, really have a period of limitation which has to be slightly open-ended, according to me. You still have to have a defined period of limitation. Therefore, that is what when does one complain? That is the question.
My small point is, unless you have a clear mechanism of registering complaints, once you have that, then you can penalize the institutions for not acting on it.
No, that's on the institution side. I'm talking about domestic sexual abuse case. You have to apply this 476. Institution, yes, you're correct. If something is documented, something can be put in writing.
Yeah.
Before I invite
that suggestion of school curriculum is actually very well taken. I think I never applied that to your mind. It should be put as a matter of curriculum in whatever truncated form. That these are the punishments that will be meted out if you do this. Whether it really has an effect or not, it's something else. I'm sorry, Mr.
Before I invite the next participant, there is one comment which I would like to read from the chat box, is that from Meera Ravi Kumar, saying that teachers should know the basic legal education on implication of sexual abuse, as well as teachers should know the definition of sexual abuse and the basics of its legal implications. So this goes to the roots of the matter as to the educating the people as well as educating. It's not only as teachers. Today, probably it is more relevant as far as Tamil Nadu is concerned in cases of teachers. There may be some other time where it will be industries. There may be some other time it may be your workplace. So many things comes up. It is a point of where we need to have an educative session on all these things. Then I invite Mr. Suresh Madhavraj, who wanted to have some specific question with to be answered by Mr. Rana Mukherjee.
Oh, okay.
Good evening, sir. Good evening.
Yes.
That was a very nice session, sir. Etymology of origin of the offense of the POCSO. Now, my question is very simple. Time up. Section 12, is it bailable?
There are two school of thought. It's actually non-bailable, cognizable offense.
Yes.
Punishment of more than 3 years. But there's some judgment. I found some High Court. Did I send one to Mr. Pinto? I don't remember.
That. The High Court, yes. Dharmender Singh versus State of.
Yes.
They gave bail. They gave conditional
bail. So you see, a non-bailable thing also you have to apply for bail.
Yes.
So therefore, even a non-bailable offense, it can be no one's case that you can never get bail. You have to apply for bail. It's a non-bailable. It's a non-bailable offense.
Remanding the accused, it should be a non-bailable.
It's a non-bailable.
That Dharmender Singh judgment was in the context of Section 29 of POCSO about the presumption of guilt. So there they said the presumption, prosecution is after the filing of the charge sheet.
Yes.
So if you're going to file a bail application before a charge sheet is filed, then 29 would not be an impediment. I mean, that's the sum and substance of Dharmender Singh, the Delhi High Court judgment.
Okay.
On bail. And they gave bail to that person.
Oh, yes. Sir, one more question, sir. Section 11 covers 354A also. Section 11 of the POCSO Act also covers, it's a sexual harassment.
Yes.
It also covers the 354A and also 67A of the IT Act. Should we put all the FIRs together for the IPC? I mean, for the FIR, APC, POCSO Act, and
that's what they do.
Normally do.
Because since it's in addition to and not in derogation of, they put everything as a abundant caution. So if not this, then the other will apply. So charges are framed accordingly. That's what the criminal code normally follows. That's why I said in that major saying, I was shocked to find that 370 was not tested because the concept then was penile incursion into the body of a victim. So they said 354. It's actually a rape of a 4.5-month-old child where a bottle, a finger is inserted, bottle is inserted. I mean, how does it not constitute rape? Like he said in the Nagpur judgment, touching Section 7 says, even touching the breast, etc., constitutes an offense punishable up to 3 years. So on facts and on law, that court is wrong. What I said, we never know which judge goes up before one judgment uphold it. Because what evidence is, we don't know. We have just seen the operative portion of what is being reported outside. I haven't seen the judgment. Maybe evidence was that, I do not know. They quote one out of context, maybe, and quote it in the paper, and people start jumping up and down. That's the problem. But I'm sure that judgment will be upturned. because
Thank
from
you,
the
sir.
nature of what it says.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
One more point I wanted to just say is, I mean, about self-defense classes. Much is being made of one karate master being, under the scanner. Tamil Nadu has had a person called Krav Maga Sriram, who very recently during the pandemic died in a tragic accident, fell off his terrace. Krav Maga Sriram has been a force of empowerment, has been a symbol of empowerment in the state. He has trained more than 40,000 women in Krav Maga. Krav Maga is an Israeli martial art. More than 40,000 women he's trained across corporate, the corporate world, in educational institutions. So we need to take that more seriously. I think self-defense, we need to, instead of cracking jokes about it, I think we need to take that more seriously. And part of the PT period can include these self-defense classes so that children will be more equipped and have more confidence. It's not just a question of physically defending themselves, but also the mental strength to, to resist and to complain.
Yeah, our participant Kali would say that 29 and 30 had taken word to word from NDPS Act.
Yes.
This is one point which was there. I think there are so many other comments which had come, so many things, but due to want of time, we may have to end the session. We cannot continue continuously. So I would lastly invite my friend, Mr. Sivashanmugam, to render a word of thanks before we wind up the day.
Friends, and thank you both the Senior Counsel and Mr. Sanjay Pindu Advocate for enlightening us and also giving their points of view on the subject, and also to point out the areas which requires to be strengthened under the POCSO Act and how the case has to be tried. And I thank you for sharing your views and spending your quality time enlightening us on the nuances of the law. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting.
Thank you.
And take care and be safe.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. Thanks for the wonderful time.